Good evening. How are you? Well, we're at Liberty of the Seas Stateroom Studio, and Holly's again helping me as an assistant director. And we have plenty to say. First of all, we are in St. John's, Bay of the Fundy in Canada, and I have noticed nothing but affection for us Americans, perhaps because we transparently are against what's wrong with what's going on in America. And I want to make a series of comments about that, even though we're supposed to be relaxing. And I think it's about good news, a development that we've hoped for, expected, thought was reasonable, and didn't understand why it had been delayed. We may be at a turning point toward the restoration of our rights and liberty, most especially our freedom to speak, to enjoy equal justice before the law, fundamental fairness, and we can only hope a reckoning for those who have been offending us by their unlawful, criminal, and dastardly actions. This is a messy moment, as past moments that we've experienced have gone before. Think about the liars in the Vietnam War, how many people died because of that. Think about Nixon's corruption and dirty tricks and the list of his enemies that he maintained. Think of Reagan's personal and undeclared war in Central America. Think of Bush the Younger and his unfounded claims that he knew were false of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Another lie. And then there's Trump, standing in the shadows of earlier fascists who failed the test of public character. Now, let me take you on a short pause in history. President John Adams, when president, insisted on having two provisions: the Alien and Sedition Act, the Alien Act and the Sedition Act. Now, these are very interesting because they are the sign of weakness. They are a sign of a weak leader. They are the sign of a person who's unconstitutional. They are the sign, in this case, of Adams as an early leader in the Federalist Party. Hamilton may have been the founder and may have pulled together all the parts, but Adams was also a part of that, just as Jefferson was the alternative. He was in opposition to the positions that Adams took. The Alien Act was not much used, but the Sedition Act was, as a muzzle to Adams' opponents. They were fined, they were jailed. Adams hoped to defeat the Jeffersonian initiatives. He had been once his close friend, but at this period he was not. Instead, he failed the second term. Didn't even show up for Trump's, that's an interesting slip. Didn't show up for Jefferson's inauguration. Left town early the evening before. You may remember that Trump did something like that when he didn't win his second term and Biden became president. So Trump has glommed on to Adams' errors, perhaps after Hamilton, the second Federalist, in my view. So Trump has been flexing his muscles beneath that mass of slippery, rubbery, oleaginous substrata that cloaks his single-minded abuse of the American people, without regard to color and gaze and so many more reasons that he finds difference. One could say that the only group he cares for are those loyal to him who are white and are male. In a succession of moves, Trump and his allies have tried to muzzle astute comics, if you will, who call out the selfish, discriminating, unlawful, criminal, hurtful, and evil behavior that all lodges itself in Trump. One last victim, and this may have been the one too far for him to test his powers as a dictator, was Jimmy Kimmel, for a monologue discussing the murder of Charlie Kirk, who was an extreme among other things, he was a racist. He indiscriminate discriminator. But the thing that started it was in response to a Jimmy Kimmel monologue, and the FCC Secretary Brendan Carr, he issued threats to large companies to follow his notion that what was done was just wrong, and they should oppose it, and they should stop it, and they should get him off the air and so forth. We're talking about Kimmel, of course. And at the risk of losing their FCC license to broadcast if they didn't do that. So he put a heavy weight on them to stop them from basically publishing what we consider free speech, the First Amendment. It was the First Amendment because it was considered the most important. It was the way to push back against the government, especially if it got things wrong. And Brendan Carr, in the heat of this thing, said, well, these different companies and so forth, the communication companies, they can do this the hard way or the easy way. So the involvement of the FCC was unlawful. It was wrongful. It was an interference in a contract and in violation of the FCC charter and in violation of local laws that I think one could argue apply to Carr for usurping the authority he had. In other words, going beyond it to do things he could not do. You can't comment on the content of material and claim that you respect the First Amendment. So the involvement of these parties at first met a group of people that were, fine with this. The Trump administration found station owners and conservative critics, and they were all in favor of doing something to Kimmel. But what happened? On the way to this carriage of injustice, we find out in the last 24 hours that sunlight has broken through, that we have a chance to push back against this felon tyrant. The Walt Disney Company announced in the last 24 hours it had thoughtful conversations with Jimmy, and it was those conversations that led them to believe they should return Kimmel Tuesday evening to the air. Now you have to keep in mind that there were wide rounds of condemnation in the Hollywood world. 500 actors, comedians, directors, musicians, and writers all opposed this. The ACLU had an open letter talking about this. One of the best summations, I thought, was Colbert, whom himself was a prior victim of this muzzling effort. And he performed on the air as his nightly monologue a blistering review of Bigfoot on Your First Amendment Rights, Trump. And Obama came out and he spoke against it too. Now get this though, the Wall Street Journal and the Free Press, conservative media, they condemned the censorship. Now it gets even stranger and encouraging at the same time. Republican Congress members Cruz, Rand Paul, Tody Young, Dave McCormick pushed back on Carr. And surprise, Cruz and McConnell compared Trump's overreach to what the mob does. That's sensational. That's a very strong statement. And these are not lesser people in the orbit that are the Republicans that those of us of good mind have been resisting. So is this a break? Well, we don't know. But again, I think it's a special moment. It is a big loss for Trump. Nobody should be surprised if they see ketchup bottles bouncing up against the windows of the White House this evening. And there's another side story here, and that is that Pope Leo XIV is removing the Archbishop of New York for comparing Charlie Kirk to St. Paul. Now, those of us who've been exposed to Roman Catholic teaching know that after Jesus, there is St. Paul in the theology and lexicon that is the Roman Catholic Church. And so you're not a Christian in the eyes of the church if you don't subscribe to these views. He was called a modern day St. Paul. Can you believe that? Incidentally, Kirk had called the pontiff, who has just removed this, or is in the process of removing this bishop, called the pontiff Marxist, heretical, and corrupt. The guy knows how to win friends, doesn't he? Now, how do I look at this? My view has always been in great struggles of those I've seen and had some small or other participation or bird's eye view of, that you look for the opportunities to use the facts you know, the law you know, and the avenues that you may have, however narrow, to push the matter through. The combination of a series of things that Trump has been at the root of is not going over with the public. his polling numbers are low, and on the issues that we're talking about, including this one. And people believe that at the very least they should be able to say, hey, you're damn wrong. Ed Koch was the mayor of New York, former congressman. When you'd walk with him, he would turn to people on the street and say, how am I doing? And then if they wanted to talk or rant at him, he would stand there and he would talk to them. You know, they talk about how Kirk communicated with people. Well, he couldn't stand 5 minutes with Ed Koch because Ed was as open as anybody could ever be to what people were saying to him. And that, they talk about having an ass man behind you. That's a person who follows what, say, a candidate or an important person. And as the candidate says he's going to do one thing or another, they write it down. So they make sure that they actually have a list of the things so they fulfill those promises. This is the good side of politics when we find it. So Trump is not that kind of politician. Trump is out there and he's for retribution. He says it's for like everybody else, but it's really, it seems unlimited. There isn't any person, loyal or otherwise, that doesn't come within the scope of his bad feeling. Now, I also would like to mention that that is Holly and I went out and walked through the area where we are, we found nothing but wonderful people greeting us. And sure, it's at a dock and so forth, but I mean, they were especially friendly. They had some beautiful things to offer. But the best anecdote I can provide, and maybe I'll elaborate upon it in another sit and talk, if you will, was with several entertainers, worldwide entertainers. And I ended up playing a personal injury lawyer. Not exactly that way, but the fellow who plays Elvis, who is amazing, and a magician like none I've ever seen, and these are both world-renowned performers, and the drummer that plays for the Elvis actor, we ran into them on the street, and we were coming back to the ship, and they were going to the police. And the reason they were going to the police was because one of them was given a scooter that the brake didn't work. So, and this guy, to save himself, had a turn in the road. He had to toss himself out because the hills here are steep, as they often are near ports. They're very steep. Remind you of San Francisco if you want to think of something you may have seen. And so they talked to me about it, and then I said, well, I'll go with you. So I went as a former federal prosecutor and a lawyer from the United States, giving full disclosure. And I said, something really should be done. And, if not a prosecution, somebody's got to stop this guy because, younger men, the driver got bunged up really bad. And we had a great conversation after we filed the complaint with a local member of the police. And here's a very funny kick. Our magician, Chris, he goes over to the officer and he shows him this a marker, and he says, "You see that?" And he made it disappear. And the cop was really good. He laughed and got a big kick out of it. And he was covering all of his weapons. He said, "Can you take anything else?" And this fella is an amazing magician, and apparently he can do it anywhere. So we have a good story to tell in the sense that there are professionals in a difficult business, the entertainment business. We got to spend time with them, and they have a social conscience, and we got to deal with people who live here in Canada and how this officer dealt with this situation. And I offered an analysis that because the fellow who didn't have the brakes, I said because he was put in apprehension of his safety by the conduct of the fellow who rented these scooters, that was assault. Assault is making someone apprehensive for their own safety. Battery is when I touch you without consent. And so it's not so much they want to prosecute it because they're all leaving town on flights sometime in the next 24 hours. And but they could do it by phone, and the officer assured us that he was going to go down, he was going to talk to the people. Two kinds of government. Okay, it may be micro, but it's the way you deal with it. What are the facts? What happened here? What is the right thing? What do you know? We had names of witnesses, including the group that was there, and I looked like I was wearing my litigation outfit. So it was amazing, and I just hope we stay in touch with these people. They were so vitalizing and so exciting, and such an example professionally and personally how they handle stuff. And I did say to the officer that is a recovering federal prosecutor, which he thought was pretty funny. I said, you never get over having that kind of experience. I said that there are two kinds of officers. One is a peace officer and the other is a Nazi. And I said, you are plainly a peace officer. And a peace officer does not mean that you don't arrest someone, but it means you only arrest them in a certain way if you have to, and you have the lawful authority to do so, and the facts justify it, and things like that. I've spent my life with very serious law enforcement people, and I've also had a fair share of my life with people that are in the Nazi category, and when they'll say what's necessary to win a case, and that is beyond my understanding why anybody would do that except for the numbers game, and that is part of it. So I hope you found this interesting. I hope it puts it in context. I, like you, will probably find some way to see Kimmel address the people, I guess, at his show on Tuesday evening. So thanks for watching, and if I can, I'll talk again tomorrow. All the best. Bye-bye.